Final Destination Bloodlines. This movie surprised me. It surprised me a fair bit. This comes out nearly 15 years after the last one, Final Destination 5. And it completely blew my expectations, which were pretty low. I didn't have high expectations. I just had expectations that this would be feeling like the other movies, and it does. Final Destination Bloodline feels like the other 5 movies. In fact, it feels so much like Final Destination that it is so refreshingly entertaining. The Saw 10 movie that brought in the old characters of Jigsaw and all that stuff, it wasn't as good to me. A lot of people really liked that movie, they liked the Jigsaw character and all that stuff, and I think you don't really need to humanize that character. You don't really need to do that. I think it's better just leave him as this mysterious, maybe slightly twisted, demented, and a villain with somewhat moral ideas, but the way Saw 10 worked and made him into a hero type of idea, it kind of just twisted the idea of the role of Saw into a completely different direction that I didn't really like. Final Destination Bloodlines does not do that. It works with the old, stays with the old, but builds on the old in a great way. Man, I did not expect it would do this type of idea, but I was thinking about it, going back to the second Final Destination movie with the idea of new life that Tony Todd's character brings up. I thought about it then, but we never really had a movie that played around with that idea, but I was always thinking about that, and I bet more than one person has been thinking about that. What if a character who survives Death's List 5, who survives a big crash or whatever, has a child? Will that child, who would not have been born otherwise, be on Death's List? This film answers that question for you in a great way. We know 2 ways that you could survive Death's List. The 5th movie brings this idea up, and I kind of completely forgot about this idea until just recently, because the 4th and the 5th movie are probably the most forgettable ones to me. The first 3 are very, very near and dear to my heart. I really enjoyed them a lot. 4 has a very entertaining side character. He works at the racetrack. He was just a very interesting character. I liked him a lot. But mostly everything else in the film was forgettable to me. In the 5th movie, I couldn't really remember most of the characters, and there's a scene with the eye doctor, though, and I completely forget if it's in the 4th or the 5th movie. There's a character at the eye doctor who goes to the eye doctor, and her eye gets stuck in this machine. That machine, that scene, that sequence definitely plays with a fear. Because especially when you go to laser eye surgery, you don't get put under, you can't get put under anesthesia, so you're sitting there with a very real fear of that laser, man. Okay, that scene, if that was in 5, that's definitely something that I want to give that thing points for. I get 2 scenes with the 2 very similar girl characters mixed up. There's one with a girl going through a car wash scene. Her head gets stuck at the top of this car wash, and then she drowns or whatever. And then there's the eye doctor scene. And I could never remember which is which unless I actually rewatched both movies. I didn't feel like rewatching the first 5 movies before I watched this one. I just went into it to try to just go off my memory and see how well this holds up with my memory of the old films. And it really did. It really held up well. In fact, the opening sequence with the Sky Dance, the Sky Needle, the Sky Forge, the Sky Tower, the Space Needle, the opening sequence with the Sky Needle is so good. It's so good. It's probably my 2nd or 3rd favorite in the entire series. Maybe 2nd. The log truck scene in Final Destination 2 is very infamous. It's probably a lot of fans of this series' favorite opening sequence. But to me, I think it's just too memed, overly memed. It does bring up a very real fear that didn't exist prior, though, I may have always thought about it, but I never saw it actually happen. When you actually see it happen in Final Destination 2, yeah, you're never driving behind a log truck ever again. You're never doing that. But In regards to this sequence and Final Destination 1's plane sequence, these are fears that would have existed without these movies even existing. People have very real fears of flying. Like the first movie plays around that very real fear and shows you an exact reason why you should never get on a plane ever, even though they're probably safer than cars at this point. Who cares? It's just the idea of how violent a terrible crash like that could be. Ooh, it plays with that fear. It plays with it in a great and amazing way. And the Space Needle, the Sky Needle scene here is also playing with a very real fear, man. It's like if I were like 6 to 10 years old, even up to 20 years old, even in modern day years old, and I get on this thing, man, I get into this thing, I go up all these feet up to the top of the Sky Needle, and they have glass beneath my feet, and I can look down and see the ground way down below, and I'd be like, no, sir, I do not want this at all. No, thank you. No. Glass can break, and you can fall through the floor and go tumbling to the ground. And that's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. And a bunch of people go falling through the glass floor because people are genius engineers and think, why not? Why not put glass beneath our feet? We're engineers. We're big brains. And, of course, we're 6 months ahead of schedule. So, naturally, it's going to fall apart. I don't care how ahead of schedule you think you are. You're going to take those 6 months to continue to make this thing structurally sound, but of course, everybody's cheap with this stuff, so they're probably not going to do that, but it just gives you an idea of a very real fear of being at the top of this thing, and a fear of heights, man. Whew. Especially with the floor is made of glass, and you look down and you can see the ground below. That's a very real fear. A very real fear, man. And of course, it's also probably the most entertaining sequence of all of them. I don't think the first one is an entertaining sequence. It's not entertaining. It's definitely scary because they're shooting that dramatically. But the Skyforge sequence, they're filming it. There you can tell everybody's having a lot of fun here, and that fun is infectious as hell, man. There is a sequence of a chained event that involves a coin being thrown off the top of the Space Needle, and then that sequence of events ends with a piano, Looney Tunes style, this piano is at the top of the Space Needle. Somebody throws a penny, this person manages to get all the way down the Space Needle, all the way down to the ground floor, and then this piano is up at the top of the Space Needle, it falls off of the top of the Space Needle, this person gets down to the ground and goes like, yeah, I made it, then the piano is like, that was very entertaining. This is probably the most entertaining opening sequences I've had in this franchise. Definitely A+ for that. The rest of the movie isn't as good as that opening sequence, admittedly. The opening sequence brought in an idea for me that I just think is an untapped, infinite potential for infinite sequels to this series. Period piece Final Destination movies. Period pieces, yes. Because you could play around with this idea across all forms of time, all forms of history. A group of people survive in the colonial ages, and then people die through crazy colonial age deaths. There's a TV show that was made around the times of the early Final Destination movies called A Million Ways to Die. It often aired on Spike TV. Remember the Spike TV? I don't think people remember cable anymore, but I do. I grew up on cable, the late 90s, the early 2000s. Cable was what everybody went to. We didn't have streaming back then, and YouTube was still too early to replace cable. So, either way, A Million Ways to Die. that's all modern ways to die in the modern world. Play around with those ideas with the whole mousetrap, Rube Goldberg. I don't know who the heck that is, but people keep bringing them up. All these ways, mousetrap ways of dying. You can play around with that in modern times as much as you want. But, what about we played with it in period piece ways, go back to the 60s and find 60s era ways to die. Go back to World War II era, find World War II era 30s ways to die. Go back to colonial times, find colonial times ways to die. Go back to the Napoleon's era and find Napoleon era ways to die. There are many, many ideas that you can play around with. Tons. It has infinite potential. And another thing that I think has potential. You know how in this entire franchise we have psychic premonitions. A character gets a psychic premonition. They foresee the crash. They foresee the terrible event. And then they could change it. They could change their future. They could change their fate. But then they realize that death says, nah, man, you can't change your fate. I'm still going to come after you. I'm still going to get you. I'm still going to get you. You can't run from me, man. I'm going to get you. And so it becomes this silent, invisible slasher villain with crazy ways of causing freak accidents and all of that stuff. But there's something that this franchise has still has still not done yet, and I think that's untapped potential for sequels, is the psychic side. Death. We've seen death. We've seen the death. We've all got all the expanded lore about the death entity, the death thing that takes everybody out. But what or who keeps giving these people the psychic premonitions to fight death? How about we play around with that? Play around with the psychics and maybe go through history and find soothsayers dating all the way back to Greek era and Roman era. People who could foresee death's plan back in the ancient world. And they could help reshape events and reshape history that way. And we learn about that, and then we find that series of freak accidents, wars, and all that stuff might have happened because of these soothsayers events way back. It's a great expansion of the idea. And this idea came to me immediately on a whim after watching this title, Bloodlines. The idea is, in the 60s, during the Skydance crash, this lady averts the catastrophe. She foresees the crazy event that crashes this whole thing, and she averts it. She saves everybody at the top of the Skydance. Everybody goes down to the ground floor. Everybody survives. And then over the course of 50 years, death has been taking out all of these people one by one. But it takes a long time. So many of these people would go on to have children. Those children would go on to have children. So by the time that death finally gets to that blonde who was the second to die during this crazy sequence, she has grandchildren. She has a whole clan of kids. And so after she finally dies, we get to go through and play around with the idea of this person who was never meant to live having children, playing around with them and them dying as well. It's an idea that I think they might have played around with the original version of Final Destination 1. There's a deleted version of the first movie that involved Clear Rivers having Alex's child. And maybe we would have played around with that idea, where maybe Alex's child is also on Death's list, and that maybe one day Death is going to come for him after Clear gets taken out, and who knows, right? That's a great idea that may have been originated, may have been drawn from that original ending. This movie may owe its existence to that original ending for the first film, and I do like that idea. I do like it because it works here. It works. It fits right in, and I liked it. The only thing that I think kind of is a little bit messy, is is the main character. There's nothing wrong with her as an actress, nothing wrong with her as a person. Maybe it's just that the people around her, the characters around her were just that much more interesting, that much more written. She was probably just written to be the black sheep, just like her mother was written to be the black sheep, just like the grandmother Iris was meant to be the black sheep. So maybe they were isolated as characters on purpose. But I really wish you would have spent a little bit more time to play with the dynamic of these three characters, the granddaughter, the mother, and the grandmother, and play around with that idea a little bit more. because it feels a little bit untapped. Some people say this movie is a little bit too long. I think you can make it a little bit longer, not a lot longer. Maybe about 5 minutes. Spend that 5 minutes to explore those three characters. Get a scene or two in there to talk about. Have these characters talk to each other or mention each other. Just build something in there so we know a little bit more about them. Or to make that just feel a little bit more, so that we feel for them a little bit more. The mother feels like the most untapped character. There's just a throwaway scene where she just exposits to her daughter, the granddaughter, about why she abandoned the family and all that stuff. I really wish we could have seen that a little bit more or explored that a little bit more, but that's just me and my old wounds. Either way, the breakout character, though, is definitely the tattooed, piercing dude. I think his name's Eric. He's definitely very entertaining. He's a very entertaining character. He definitely is like the skeptic, but also he immediately believes in it after his sister dies. And so he's all about trying to save his younger brother. And that's a very good sequence. And the death sequence there is also very entertaining, very good. It's very stupid, but still very entertaining. I would say that the kills in this movie are entertaining. Very, very, very entertaining. The people who made this movie are fans of this series. They're fans. They have to be. It's been 14 years. People who were teenagers then are now old enough to be in the industry working on these films. So I definitely hope some of those fans who watched these movies when they first came out are working on these next movies. And I definitely think you can make a Bloodlines too. I definitely think you can. Because when we get to Tony Todd's scene in this movie, when we get to that scene, Tony Todd ends up explaining his origins and why he knows all of the things he's known since the beginning of these films. We finally get to understand why he knew everybody's names, why he knew Death's List, why he knew all the plans and the theories and all of that stuff. And to some people it might come as a little bit of a letdown, because maybe they would have liked the idea of this character being more supernatural, and then maybe he was actually Death himself playing around with the survivors, going, "I'll see you soon," and all that stuff. They would have been pretty fun. But I think the way they did this scene was a lot better, making him the final survivor of the Skydance, Skyforge, the Skyfall, the Sky Needle, the Sky Tower, the towers, the final survivor of that, meaning that once this family, Iris's family, goes down, once they're done, he's next. But he's already dying, he says. Natural causes has already caught up to him. So he's beaten death. He's beaten the premature death thing. So I love that triumph in his voice, man. He definitely made it, man. And I think maybe during the 50-year time, during that 50-plus years time skip there, maybe he could have had a family of his own. Maybe he could have had a son. I definitely think he would have had a son, and maybe that son would be having a newborn of his own on the way, and he'd be trying to protect that. There's an interesting idea that you could play around with there, that I definitely think a sequel could work with. In that, maybe what if a child is in the womb of somebody who wasn't on Death's List? Like, they play around with this idea. The aunt in this movie is safe from death because she's not part of the original accident. She's not a child of somebody part of the accident, but she gave birth to children from somebody who was born, who was a son of Iris. But what if that child was still in the womb of one of those characters who wasn't on Death's List? Would that fetus growing in the womb be part of an accident like that? Maybe you could play around with a movie like that. Maybe the Tony Todd's son has a wife and he's got a kid on the way, and he realizes now that his father's gone, he's next. What about his unborn child? and maybe play around with premonitions and anything like that. Maybe the wife gets the premonition, but it's actually the premonition inside the womb, but it's coming towards her as well, and then she gets the idea. You could play around with these things, and I definitely think you could play around with history as well. Play around with soothsayers, play around with fortune tellers, going all the way back to Italia, and all these classic things, and Rome and Greece, and all that stuff. There's so many ideas you could play around with, because we've done many ideas with Death. We've learned about his exposition. We've learned about his list. We've learned about his plans. We've learned about messing with him and how messing with him, he has him to mess with you back. And we don't really talk about the psychic part. Who or what is giving these characters their premonitions to avoid death, to change their fate? We could play around with that, I think we could play around with that idea. Maybe play around with it going back to, like, the Greeks and the Fates. Maybe add some history into the sequel and have a character who's an archaeologist or something, who learned about all these survivors and then learned that there's been repeats of these types of tragic accidents dating back centuries and centuries, and maybe there's an answer in the past that can answer problems today. That could be a pretty good idea. I love history ideas like that. I love it, love it, love it. Maybe we could try something like that. I definitely think that could work.